Well, I'm joined now by Sonia Sodha, who is a columnist for The Guardian and Observer, and also a former advisor to Ed Miliband when he was leader of the opposition, and also by Dan Hodges, who's a political commentator at The Mail on Sunday. Thank you both so much for joining us on BBC News. You will have been watching that briefing with very close attention, I'm sure. Sonia, Grant Shapps at pains, I think, to describe this as a personal story of a father who was trying to do his best for his family and his child. What did you make of it?
Well, I, and I'm sure lots of other people watching that press conference, felt extremely confused afterwards. The government had a choice, I think, today. It could either admit that Dominic Cummings has broken government guidance, I think it's very clear that he has, and sack him, as they have done other advisors who've done the same thing. Or the government could try and sort of protect Dominic Cummings and try and tell us that he didn't break the guidance. And that's what it's chosen to do. And I think in doing so, it's undermined its own public health advice. Jenny Harries was really clear in that press conference. If you develop symptoms, you and your household must stay at home unless there's an extreme risk to life. But we had Grant Shapps, who seemed to say, well, actually, it's a decision for individuals, whether you've got enough support around you. So really what the government is doing, what cabinet ministers have been doing all day and coming out and defending Dominic Cummings, the health secretary has said that, you know, what he did was was right. What they're doing is undermining their own guidance. And by doing that, they're putting lives at risk. So I think it's really quite shocking. I think people are going to be quite confused. Is it okay now to travel across the country when you're in a couple? One of you is sick, one of you isn't. You might have some worries about childcare. Is it okay to travel 260 miles to travel to see your extended family? It really wasn't clear from that press conference. It leaves huge confusion. So I think it's incredibly damaging. And I think it shows that the government have chosen to prioritise one of their colleagues and saving the career of one of their colleagues over sort of being clear about the guidance.
Dan, does it muddy the message?
No, I actually took completely the opposite from Sonia from that. I think actually, in a way, to some extent, it draws a line under the issue. I mean, I think Jenny Harries and Grant Shapps were very clear, and Jenny Harries specifically. I mean, it's clear that the government's advice is in these circumstances, if there are other vulnerable individuals involved, and I don't think anybody would argue a 4-year-old child whose parents are not in a fit state to care for them would not qualify as a vulnerable individual in these circumstances, then it is perfectly legitimate to use discretion and what Jenny Harries used termed as common sense. And I thought it was interesting in the introduction to this, your own correspondent pointed to that very specific advice in the official government guidance, and I think it's this common sense element that is the key to all this. I think anybody dispassionately looking at this in that scenario, who did have a situation in which they and their partner were unable to cope to look after a 4-year-old child because they had an onset of this illness, would do whatever it took to ensure the child was put in a safe place. I would do that. I assume you would do that. I think most people watching this programme would do that.
It's clear, though, from what's been said, that Dominic Cummings didn't have symptoms when he got on the road to go up to Durham. And I think that's really where the question mark comes. If everybody in a family with children, as soon as one person in the family fell ill with COVID-19, decided it was okay to travel across the country just in case they required childcare, that would really pull the rug from underneath the government guidelines. And indeed, we know Dominic Cummings is a source close to Dominic Cummings and Number 10 have said that that Dominic Cummings and his immediate family were socially distanced. They didn't actually require that childcare. That is not the extreme risk to life that Jenny Harries was talking about. And I think up and down the country, people have had to make incredibly difficult decisions. And lots of people will have said, right, we must abide by the government guidance. Even that means if we can't be with sick loved ones, even if we can't say goodbye to them for the last time. And they're going to be really angry that a top government advisor seemingly flouted the advice in that way. It just does not hold up to scrutiny.
Dan, can I just put another potential difficulty for the government, which is that Dominic Cummings' wife, who is a senior figure on The Spectator magazine, herself put out an account of what happened to them when they had coronavirus. And in that account, she suggested that she became ill and then he became ill the day after, and that both of them were really quite stricken by this. And one wonders how that squares with the statement now given out by Downing Street.
Well, to be perfectly honest, I mean, I've heard a lot about. I mean, what Dominic Cummings. I'm not really interested in, to be perfectly honest, in what Dominic Cummings' wife writes. That's a matter for her. I'm interested in what Dominic Cummings says. And
but it's about them both. It's about what happened to them then.
Well, but as I said, the important thing is what Dominic Cummings says and what the government said. And to reiterate, just pick up on the point Sonia said. In those circumstances in which a partner is sick and another one may feel that they were becoming sick or had a fear they were becoming sick and didn't have alternative childcare arrangements, what are they supposed to do? Wait until they are both sick and incapacitated and then try and sort out childcare? Jenny Harris was very clear. Your correspondent was very clear at the start of this piece on what the advice was. In those circumstances, a young child would be classified self-evidently as a vulnerable individual, and it would be perfectly legitimate for individuals in those circumstances to secure assistance. And frankly, I cannot believe we are actually sitting here parsing the details of official government advice, because remember, we're not talking about any laws being broken here, we're talking about advice.
Well, we're talking about the public's understanding of the guidance, Sonia.
Yeah. It's clear government guidance. This is not just, minor advice. It's instructions that the government issued to us in order to protect the NHS and save lives. And I'm afraid that Dominic Cummings, in breaking that guidance, which I think it's very clear that he has done, it reeks of breathtaking arrogance and like he has a disregard for healthcare workers' lives. It's not right. Jenny Harris was very clear. She said, stay in unless there's an extreme risk to life. I think it will come as a huge surprise to parents up and down the country, particularly if you're a single parent and you might be really worried about how you're going to care for your child if you get seriously sick. The idea that in those circumstances you could take off across the country, drive for hundreds of miles to be with your extended family, that just does not sit with the guidance and instructions
but with respect,
the government have been giving us for weeks.
But with respect, this is the example of the complete lunacy of where we've got to in this debate. So Dominic Cummings quite clearly did this. Whether he was right or wrong, people can form a view. But he quite clearly did this because his primary concern was the welfare of his 4-year-old child. We now have Sonia coming on saying, actually, this is an example because he doesn't really care for the health of health workers, and effectively implying he just wants health workers to die. It's absolutely ridiculous.
No, I don't think she was
precisely this. It's precisely this sort of dialogue that has got us in the absolutely disgusting situation where, as you pointed out, we as a society have said to protect ourselves from this disease, we shall have a situation where children are allowed to die alone or people can't attend other people's funerals.
Dan,
we're now saying a man should be sacked from his job for looking after his 4-year-old child. It's ridiculous. We've gone mad. We are going mad.
Dan, can I just come in? I mean, it does matter who Dominic Cummings is, doesn't it? He is he's at the heart of government, one of the architects of this message that a lot of people have interpreted much more strictly than he appears to have.
But with respect, you are now saying he's the architect of this message. Remember what the criticism of Dominic Cummings has been entirely up to this point. He's supposed to be the guy who wasn't the architect of this message, didn't want lockdown and wanted herd immunity to run throughout the country. So that wasn't the criticism that was being directed at Cummings until this. But the reality is Dom Cummings is an advisor. Now, I and other people and Sonia have spent months, if not years, attacking and criticising and condemning the status that Dom Cummings has in government. Rightly so. He's an advisor. He's not a politician. He's not an elected politician. This is not...
Ministers other advisors have had to resign for breaking the guidance and breaking the rules, and I would argue far less serious breaking of the rules. People who weren't symptomatic with COVID breaking.
But did you think? But Sonia,
government's payroll are seen to be complying with government advice. Otherwise, it gives a message to people out in the country that they don't need to comply with government instructions as well. And I think if everyone had done what Dominic Cummings chose to do, more lives would have been put at risk. And that
it sends the message that if you have a 4-year-old child and you are concerned for the child's welfare, you have to put the welfare of the child first before government advice. And that is common sense, and that's absolutely right. And if you're not doing that, then frankly, you need your head examining.
He didn't require childcare for his child. He stayed socially distant.
How do you know? How do you know what the circumstances for Dominic Cummings were? What was he doing? Why was he doing it? Why was he driving 250 miles? Because he wanted to take in the view. He wanted a bit of scenery. He just wanted to get out for a bit. Of course, that's why he was doing it. Why else was he doing it?
Can I just ask you both briefly one question? We've got members of the cabinet rushing in to be supportive and protective of Dominic Cummings. Do you think that he will survive this? Sonia first, please, and then Dan.
No, I think it will be strung out, but I think eventually he will have to resign.
OK. Dan?
Yeah, he will. He'll stay.
He'll stay. All right. Listen, thank you both very much indeed. Dan Hodges and Sonia Sodha, thank you both very much. Thank you.